Welcome to the MMHP in the 989, channeling all styles and eras of Michigan music history. Recorded live inside the Rock Legends Hall of Fame in Bay City, Michigan. Featuring Dr. J, Sir Fred, Mr. Mike, and your host, Scott Baker.
Okay, welcome everybody. Once again, we're at the Michigan Rock and Roll Legends Hall of Fame studio with our team, Fred Reif, Mike Beatty, Scott Baker, and yours truly, Dr. J. And we have a special guest tonight, Benny Speer of Benny and the Jets. All right, they were inducted into the Michigan Rock and Roll Legends Hall of Fame in 2016. So, Benny, welcome.
Energy, excitement, good times, action. Cub Coda would be jumping up and down and screaming. He'd be talking about the big three. He'd say Bob Seger, Ted Nugent, Mitch Ryder, and he'd throw in question Mark and the Mysterians.
Oh,
and we'd have a show then, wouldn't we?
Oh, man. And we saw the Mysterians Sunday at the St. Joseph Church Festival in Saginaw. It was great. The original members, all from the 1960s, played. That was really cool. But we're here to talk about you tonight, and we usually like to start out, very early in your life. You were born in Ann Arbor, right?
Right down
But
the
you
street.
didn't really grow up in Ann Arbor. You grew up in more of a small town. Can you kind of tell us about that?
Yeah, well, my parents were in Ann Arbor and got married and we wanted to go to the suburban life, and we moved not far from Ann Arbor, a little town called Plymouth, Michigan. And so really, I could say I grew up in Plymouth, but I was born in Ann Arbor.
Now, Plymouth, they're famous for the Daisy BB gun manufacturing company.
I think they had BB
true?
guns. Yeah, sure.
God, I remember getting my first BB gun. I was so excited. It was kind of like the Christmas story, where parents were all afraid you were going to shoot your eye out or something like that. And actually, being the goofy kids that we were, we would have BB gun fights, and actually a friend of mine did get shot in the eye, did not lose his eye, but ended up going to the hospital. That put it into our BB gun fights after that happened.
Oh, no.
So, growing up, I remember that you got to, when you were just a young guy, you got to kind of hang out with Jamie Coe. And I still have the 45 of Jamie Coe's recording of The Fool on Big Top Records. How did you get to know Jamie Coe?
Well, my dad, who was a doctor, and I think that's the reason he went to Ann Arbor initially. My dad was from Indiana, became a chiropractor, and I think for whatever reason, they said Ann Arbor is the place you should be. So he moved to Ann Arbor to be a chiropractor, and then he opened up several offices, one in Ypsilanti, one in Plymouth, and we ended up living at the one in Plymouth. And so as my dad, being an entrepreneur, ended up investing in a nightclub. There was a famous nightclub in Dearborn, Michigan called the Military Inn. It was home to the world's largest gun collection. And in fact, they said it had 10,000 guns. It was built like an old castle, kind of like City Hall next door to where we are right here in Bay City.
Okay.
It's built like an old castle right on Telegraph and Warren Roads. And on Fridays and Saturdays, they would bring bands in. And Jamie Coe at that time, and this is mid-'60s, late 60s, was the biggest band in town. And they brought Jamie Coe in, and I was third or fourth grade, and I would sit there Google-eyed at Jamie and his band, which was a really good band.
That was the Gigolos, right?
Yeah, I should state that, in that 60s, there was a lot of garage bands, a lot of bands that weren't that good. Jamie Coe was a really good band, and famous people knew Jamie from his record and would occasionally come through and stop at the bar and see Jamie, and he would sing his songs. And Jamie, being the nice guy that he was, I don't want to say took me under his wing, but he was, being third, fourth grade, a wannabe musician. He was very free with his time. He would talk to me and show me stuff. And in fact, I had set up a little a little stage at my house, and I used a broomstick for a microphone. And Jamie says, no, he gave me a microphone stand, a real microphone stand. So he was just went out of his way to be nice.
So he would come over to the house.
Yeah,
and
it was
he was very friendly with your
family,
dad.
our whole because he played for my dad for many years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he's kind of one of those sort of unknown Michigan artists, but he released quite a few 45s over the years.
Yeah, known, unknown. You're right. He's like the world's greatest unknown.
Really?
Didn't he also do commercials?
It sounds possible.
like-
Yeah, it sounds possible.
I remember him from a commercial.
But Bobby Darin, big celebrities knew of Jamie. I heard stories with Frank Sinatra and Jamie Coe. So people knew who Jamie Coe was. American Bandstand kind of thing. So Jamie Coe was a great guy.
So that was kind of the start then, the military end of your dad getting involved in the Detroit music scene, because he really, he was involved in a lot of different things, a lot of different places. What can you tell us a little bit more about your dad and his involvement in music during, I guess it would be the 60s, the 70s? Did he go into the 80s also? Was he still involved at that point?
I think he was kind of phasing out by the 80s, but definitely in that 60s, he had that military in, found Jamie Coe. They kind of struck magic, and they went down the street to get a bigger nightclub, and they called that one the West Side Six, and that also became a very popular nightclub around town. Starting out with the Jamie Coe era, Jamie Coe played there for several years, but eventually the music scene started to change, and so they would get bands like the Frost at the West Side Six. They would get bands like the Rockets and a lot of those Motor City bands that were becoming famous into the 70s. That bar became so big and popular, he went around to the other end of town and bought a bigger bar, because this is when the era of big nightclubs, 500-seat nightclubs, were starting to happen. So he had a nightclub in Wayne, Michigan. They called it the Funny Farm. And the Sunday Funnies in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Well, Ross Helko was just here as a guest not too long ago.
For the grand opening of the Funny Farm, there was a band called the Sunday Funnies, and there was a band called Boone's Farm. And the two bands would split the week there. One would play 3 nights, one would play 4 nights. And so it was Funny's Farm, Sunday Funnies, Boone's Farm. Wow. And it was right down the street from the Eloise Mental Hospital. So there was a little Funny Farm connection.
Oh, man.
And my dad was a doctor running a bar with a bunch of crazy rock and roll kids running around. Remember, it was 18-year-old drink then as well. So these were young people going to these nightclubs at this point. And that bar became super famous, super popular. Iggy and the Stooges played there. Bob Seger played there. Let me think. The MC5, a great renowned Detroit music band, played their last gig. Their last place they ever played was at the Funny Farm there. And guys like Russ Gibb, famous disc jockey,
sure.
Russ Gibb. He was a concert promoter as well. He would be in there bringing some of those bands through there. And then right about that time, there was a big theater downtown Detroit called the Michigan Palace Theater. And I was reading the Little Plymouth newspaper, and it's mentioned that the Michigan Palace Theater was going out of business, and it was for sale for $50,000. And I told my dad, I said, you pay more for that at the Funny Farm than this 5,000-seat theater downtown Detroit.
It's a parking lot now.
It is, yeah. And so he went downtown to look at it, and it was like the Taj Mahal then in the 70s. It was beyond belief how big and beautiful it was. So he bought it for that $50,000, and Russ Gibb was there, and they bumped into a guy named
Stephen Glantz?
Gabe Glantz, his dad, the lawyer,
okay.
Gabe Glantz, and his son, Stephen Glantz, who were running the Easttown, which was running to the end of its run at that point. And so all these forces converged on the Michigan Palace, and it became one of the biggest concert theaters in the area at that time. Which is early 70s.
We went to see the New York Dolls, sir.
The grand opening of the Michigan Palace was 9/22/73 with the New York Dolls, were the first band. And they were kind of an unknown band at the time.
Yeah, they were just made their first album at that point, and they were kind of touring behind it. Yeah, I was reading where, unfortunately, the Michigan Palace over the years got pretty much destroyed by the rock and roll crowds. You know, they weren't real respectful of, you know, the beauty of that place. That's too bad.
True enough,
Yeah.
but I think that's over exaggerated. And it's true. It was, there's maintenance you have to do on any building, but and it needed maintenance, but it's over exaggerated. That wasn't the reason the place ended its run. The reason was the infighting between Glances and Speers and promoters, and everybody wanted their own way to do things, and so the people behind the scenes kind of fought, and that was that became the end of it.
Yeah.
So Russ Gibb that was post Grandy Ballroom then, eh?
Correct. Right. As it was just ending, the Easttown and the Granding were kind of winding up and closing out, and they were looking for a new location. Interestingly, I think the Grandy might have only been 1,500 seats. Do you know how many seats the Grandy was?
No, I'm not sure.
I'm not sure.
1,500
It
seats.
definitely
It
wasn't
was low.
5,000.
The Easttown, a couple of thousand. So things were getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And the Michigan Palace really fit into that well. At the end of the Michigan Palace, all the bands that became famous growing up at the Michigan Palace, bands like New York Dolls, bands like Bob Seger, bands like Kiss, Aerosmith, they were all part of that Michigan Palace family. They were getting to the point where they were too big for the 5,000 seat Palace. So Steve Glantz started promoting the 17,000 seat Cobo Arena, where Kiss did their live album, where Bob Seger did his live album. All the bands from the Michigan Palace family kind of grew up and exploded worldwide.
Yeah.
Wow. Was that so that and the New York Dolls thing coming into town? You said that was right after the record was done. Was that because of Todd Rundgren? Was Todd being huge at that time too there?
He was working on their album on
Yeah,
that
he
end of it.
produced the album.
But it was actually Russ Gibb who knew the connection. He's the one that had heard of the New York Dolls. They were, to my knowledge, basically unknowns.
Yeah, they were real big in Cream magazine.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
Cream,
there's
yeah.
the connection, to Detroit.
And they hadn't played in Detroit.
Cream was covering them
Right.
extensively.
That's cool.
And
Yeah.
they sold out, I should mention, too, for a semi-sold
So
out,
cool.
or for a semi-unknown band, let's call them a very cultish band.
Yeah.
They sold out. And interestingly, my dad, being the very common sense kind of guy, walked up to David Johansen and thanked him for playing at the Michigan Palace, like he was talking to Jamie Coe or me or whoever. And he says, "Is there any other bands in New York that I should know about that could come here and do well?" And David Johansen said, "You have to look for this band called Kiss."
Wow.
They were unknown. So my dad paid Kiss $500, and they drove from New York in a van.
Yep.
Didn't have their big suits. They did have the face makeup on, but not the suits and the elaborate stage presentation. And my dad had them open up for Blue Oyster Cult.
Is that 74?
73.
73, the
Yeah.
first year. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And from there on, it's history.
Totally.
They went from being a little opening band in a van to one of the biggest bands in the world.
Well, Kiss played at Delta College Gymnasium
So cool.
in the
Yeah,
early
that same
70s.
kind of
yeah.
stuff.
And they had a little bit of the fireworks, but not much. But still, they were pretty interesting.
I was always thinking about the story at the Michigan Palace. One of my first jobs at the Michigan Palace, Aerosmith was opening up for somebody, and the record company had sent down 5,000 albums to give away to the customers. So they had a box of 5,000 albums, which would almost fill this room that we're in now. That's a lot of albums. It's a U-Haul truck full of albums. They took boxes of cardboard boxes full of albums in the lobby of the Michigan Palace, and as the people came out, they didn't want to give them to them on the way in because they were afraid to be frisbees.
You'd be throwing them all over.
On the way out, they wanted to give them away, and nobody took the albums. Nobody had heard of Aerosmith.
That album did nothing until it was
First
Dream
one,
On
right.
started getting
Right.
radio play, and then all of a sudden it becomes a million sellers.
Well, so
for sure.
let me finish the story real quick, though. So my dad the next day says, we're going down there to clean up after a big concert. My dad says, "Hey, take all these albums and throw them in the dumpster."
Holy crap.
But to throw them in the dumpster, you had to go through the lobby around. It was a block. You had to walk around the block, and one box of albums is a load.
Oh, yeah.
I said, "Dad, this will take all day." And my dad, being the common sense guy he was, says, "Well, you better get started." So that was my connection to Aerosmith and show business.
Oh, wow. Now, your love of rock and roll really goes way back. And I remember when I first interviewed you, you were talking about your rock and roll heroes weren't necessarily like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. You went back to like Elvis and Ricky Nelson and so on. Maybe tell us a little bit about how you got started with, you know, maybe the stars really of rock and roll's first decade.
Yeah, I'm, I guess, a product of my generation. So I was born in the 50s. And, you know, if you were going to turn on the radio or see Ed Sullivan, you were going to see Elvis or you were going to see Ricky Nelson. Everybody used to watch the Ozzie and Harriet show with Ricky Nelson, and he would come on at the end of the show and sing a song. And if you're a little kid playing guitar, that was magic for you. And so just to be around those influences was really great. The first concert I ever went to, me and my buddy hitchhiked downtown Detroit. We weren't old enough to drive to the old Olympia Stadium and saw Elvis in concert. So that was my first concert you ever saw. That was a pretty big moment to see Elvis in concert.
Now, when you started playing, though, you were playing more of the oldies, right? I mean, weren't you like playing the music of Elvis and Ricky and so on?
For sure, yes.
Where probably the other kids were playing maybe like the British Invasion groups and so on. So you guys were sort of a little bit of an outlier. How did that go over with you, you know, playing the older songs?
I'm going to stumble around and think I'm going to say supply and demand. I think when we were like junior high school, they would have a 50s dance.
Oh, okay.
And
sure.
so we would be the band that would get the job. And maybe the junior high school down the street would have a 50 dance. And so it was kind of a supply and demand kind of thing. There was a lot of bands playing Grateful Dead or, you know, whatever the music of the time was. But there was more of a niche for the oldies acts. And
yeah, that's really interesting. Now, Chris Campbell, who most people probably recognize as being a member of the Silver Bullet Band, he went to school with you, is that correct?
Yeah, he lived right down the street from me, and we went to the same high school together, and he was one of the kids.
Did he play in your band, or?
Well, no, but we replaced each other in a couple little high school bands growing up. So we were in the little town of Plymouth. There was a dozen musicians or 24 musicians, and they would all play with each other at one time or another in one group or another group, and so we were all interchangeable. Yeah.
Yeah,
and I want to tell you, to speak up for Chris Campbell, another great guy. You know, there's people you come across in the music business that are full of themselves, or you know, way up on a ladder. But Chris Campbell, even when his success of his Silver Bullet Band success, always was a great guy. I have a lot of great Bob Seger stories, and most of those are because Chris Campbell was, you know, part of those Bob Seger stories.
Okay, well. Don't tease us. Well, you got a good one?
Let's think of a good Bob Seger story.
All right.
Benny and the Jets. In 1982, we bought a brand new van, and we put 100,000 miles on that van in 1 year, 1982. And one of our big cities that we played at was Ottawa, Canada. So the local disc jockey in Ottawa, Canada would come see us and says, "Oh, Benny, your buddy's coming to town." Who's my buddy? He goes, "Bob Seger." And I go, how would this guy? Bob Seger's not my buddy. We're acquaintances. We know each other. He worked for my dad many times, but we're not buddies, you know. And I don't know how this guy in Ottawa, Canada would know there's any connection anyways. But he started promoting the rumor around Ottawa, Canada that Benny and Bob, they're best friends, they're buddies, they're friends, they're buddies. And the rumor started going wild to the point that the nightclub that we were playing at, like the Tuesday, the Wednesday night, it was crowded, people coming up. "Oh, you know Bob Seger?" Because Bob Seger in 82 was really peaking. He was at his peak.
Exactly.
We were playing at a 200-seat bar in Ottawa. He was playing at the 80,000-seat, what they call that dome, it's kind of like our Silver Dome, the Super X. I think they called it the Super X. And so this rumor was getting out of hand. So I called my agent in Detroit, and I said, hey, I'm really kind of nervous about this. I trust me, I didn't have anything to do with it. Oh, yeah, I bet. I said, so can you get me Bob Seger's agent's phone number, and I can call him just to warn him about this rumor or whatever. So I called the agent. The agent told me what hotel Bob Seger was staying at. I hiked downtown Ottawa to the hotel. Just happened to bump into him right when they're coming in. Chris Campbell's there. Oh, let's go in and have lunch. And I sit down with the whole Silver Bullet Band in Ottawa, Canada. I tell them the story that this disc jockey was promoting this rumor, and he was a big disc jockey in town too. And I said, if you guys after the show, if any of you, if a roadie, if a friend of anybody can come down and just wave, it would be incredible. And they said, oh yeah, good, good seeing you. We'll see you around. And that was kind of the end of our story. So I get to the bar. And there's a line around the block, 200-seat bar, 500 people outside the bar.
Is this the Rainbow Room?
No, this was, originally it was called the Black Swan, but by the time we got there, it was called Arnold's, like Happy Days, 50s.
Okay.
It was the oldies 50s. They had a 1950s jukebox. They had the oldies band, Benny and the Jets from Detroit, Michigan playing there, who was friends with Bob Seger. And there's 500 people in line outside the building. And so we start playing, and we're all nervous, and there's a buzz that this building has never seen before. And all of a sudden, people come walking up to the stage and start tugging on me. He's here. He's here. Bob Seger and 3 silver limousines with the entire band and entourage came walking into the bar, and there was a little restaurant area up front, so they kind of corralled them into the front. And at the time, I had a wireless guitar, so I could walk through the crowd, and I walked back to the little corner where they were hiding Bob Seger, and I handed him my guitar. But the band's playing along, and Bob Seger played along, and he handed the guitar to Drew Abbott, and Drew Abbott walked up on stage instead of me and played the song, and eventually the whole band went up there, and eventually it became a huge party, and it was one of those moments in rock and roll history that 82, 92, 02. Many years later, I could be on a podcast telling the story. That's what a big moment it was.
Oh, that's awesome.
You got the Seger band to jam.
Yeah, we all jammed and hung out, and it was an incredible night. And I'm sure if you got a hold of Chris Campbell or Bob Seger and said, hey, remember that night in Ottawa? They might even remember that night.
Well, we did have Drew Abbott here. I wish I would have known about this when he was our guest. Now, you also became good friends with Cub Coda, right?
And I tiptoe around good friends, but I idolized Cub Coda, and we were friends and acquaintances, and we talk about people that I kind of idolize when we talk about Jamie Cole or Elvis Presley or Ricky Nelson. Cub Coda kind of on that list. We talked about School Kid Records a minute ago in Ann Arbor, and there was a music store called Al Nally Music where all the stars bought their equipment. So the little kids from Plymouth would go to Al Nally just on a chance to, while you're buying your guitar strings or your guitar picks, just by the chance to rub elbows with a Ted Nugent or a Drew Abbott or a Cub Coda. And so we kind of met Cub as junior high school kids, and Cub, once again, one of those guys that was a friendly, knowledgeable person. And anybody that doesn't know the name Cub Coda, I guess we should say Google it, because Google's a wonderful thing. Yeah. Cub was so multi-talented, not only a singer, songwriter, performer. He wrote and reviewed records and made a lot of newspaper columns.
Goldmine, too.
Goldmine magazines.
Yeah, the Vinyl Junkie.
Yeah, Vinyl
That
Junkie.
was one of my favorite columns.
He wrote a lot of liner notes. We were
tons of it.
competing for some.
Yeah, and so I as well tried to follow in Cub's footsteps through his, he said, Benny, do this, do that, do that. And so I wrote in 7 different newspapers for some 20 years, all from Cub's inspiration of writing and talking about music.
Yeah, wow.
It's beautiful. I didn't know you had the journalist side too.
Yeah.
That's where I come from. I mean, I was a musician all the time, but I wrote for the Bay State Times and sang on the news for many years.
Yeah, it's interesting how they correlate.
It
You know
is.
how they overlap and correlate. I basically wanted to. My idea was to do it because I wanted publicity, promotion. But then I wanted my friends to have publicity and promotion, and then I wanted to provide a good column to actually help promote the scene itself.
100%.
And it just kind of all grows. It was a kind of a self-growing thing, and it's funny once it was in one newspaper, another newspaper picked it up, and pretty soon it was running in 7 different newspapers. There was a magazine called The Music Connection that eventually carried the column, and it really went around.
And what was the initial newspaper?
I have to try to remember that.
Plymouth
'Cause so many
newspaper?
of these papers would go in and out of business. I think there was a thing called the Eagle newspapers, and Eagle had a Wayne Eagle, Westland Eagle. You know, they were like the Suburban 8 or something.
And you get
like
put
that.
on their wire, and they get the wire feed would go out.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would get wired. Sometimes I'd find out I had a story in Kalamazoo or Ann Arbor or Detroit. They just
Exactly.
wanted to copy something to fill space, you know.
Yes,
and you're
exactly. You never know where
You
it's
never
gonna,
know.
where it's
Never
going to
know.
pan into.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I kind of, Cub Coda kind of gave me the shove to go in that direction, but I kind of felt I copied a little bit off of Bob Talbert, Bob Talbert was the Detroit Free Press, right? Let's see, News. Free Press.
Free Press.
For many, many years, who kind of covered the scene. You could read his column, and you'd have a thumbprint of what was going on in the area a little bit. And I really liked that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, he did an article on School Kids records.
Oh, many times, I think. He mentioned School Kids many
okay.
times, yeah. And anybody just listening right now, School Kid Records was one of those Hall of Fame places. You know, when we went to Ann Arbor, when we talked about this Al Nally music store and the Blind Pig shop and School Kids Records, and it was just a fraternity of music places that everybody would frequent. And if you went up to Bob Seger or Mitch Ryder or Ted Nugent, they all know School Kid Records.
Right.
And 100,000 University of Michigan students as well.
We had a lot of in-store.
Yes, concerts and
in
stuff.
there.
Yeah.
Fred was just on one of the podcasts we released just recently saying about Jeff Daniels coming to School Kids and buying a lot of blues records.
Yes, incredible.
Yeah. I love those stories.
Well, Ann Arbor, always a hub for entertainment and stars, kind of because they have the artificial 100,000 students who support that kind of music or any kind of music. There's 100,000 kids, and they're looking for every genre of music to look into, so everybody could be successful and find a niche in Ann Arbor. And just all the bands would gravitate to Ann Arbor, I think.
Yeah, there were a lot of great record stores in Ann Arbor at that time. That's totally changed, hasn't it, Fred? You go, you used to go to Ann Arbor to record shop. I mean, because School Kids was so great, Discount Records was great. It was really a lot of fun. And now I don't know, is there even
Encore.
Yeah, Encore is still pretty
good.
good.
The best.
Yeah, they have a lot of. Yeah, well, you can
CDs
find a lot of used CDs there, good deals there for sure. Yeah, I know you're great friends with Question Mark. When did you first see Question Mark and the Mysterians?
Well, I mentioned how my very first concert was Elvis Presley at Cobo Arena. My second concert, this entertainment agent named Jerry Patlow, famous entertainment agent, handled a lot of bands, and probably many of the bands that are in the Michigan Rock and Roll Legends.com Hall of Fame are worked with Jerry over the years. Jerry told me, I'm an upcoming musician at the time, I want you to go to Schoolcraft College and see this band called Question Mark and the Mysterians. And I said, okay. So I went to Schoolcraft College, and I might have been a senior in high school or something. And it was I have to remember, Question Mark, a band called The Rumor. Do you know The Rumor?
I've heard of them.
Yeah, I think that was a Detroit band, wasn't it?
Yeah, good Detroit band.
Not the one that played with Graham Parker. This would have been a Detroit band.
The Rumor, and I forgot the third band, but there was three bands there, and Question Mark was the headline. And so down the hallway, backstage, were these guys that were kind of like greasers. Now we're talking kind of the hippie era, and Benny and the Jets band was kind of an oldies greaser band in a hippie era. So I was immediately interested and attracted to these greaser looking guys in the hallway of this hippie college. And with the exception of one guy that was wearing a see-through shirt, And
Guess who that is?
and that was Question Mark. And I went up and introduced myself to Question Mark and told him Jerry Padlow had sent me down there, the famous entertainment agent. And once again, he was very nice. I guess I feel in our little podcast we kind of touched on, I was lucky to bump into so many nice rock and roll stars. And Question Mark and I became great friends over the years. We exchanged phone numbers, and Question Mark likes to talk on the phone.
Oh, yes.
And I answer the phone, so we became great friends. Kind of over the phone.
Was this the original band, or had he? You know, I know toward the end of the '60s, the original group kind of shattered, and he had some other musicians. Like, do you know Bobby Balderrama? Was Bobby still playing
yes,
with him?
I believe this was all the original guys still.
So they
at this
were
point.
still together at that point.
So it would have been probably 68 would have been the end of that, early 69.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's when it started to crack away.
Yeah, I'm not 100% positive on all the members, but Bobby was there, and I think they were all the original guys for this show.
Or most of them, anyway.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, we just, I think I mentioned we had just seen them Sunday at the festival in Saginaw. It was great to see him play. Question Mark is kind of showing his age, but he was still out there, and his voice was pretty good.
That's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. Now, I remember when I first talked to you, you said that when you were in high school, you were playing in the bars while you were in high school and making really good money. How did that work? How did you get away with it? Didn't they have laws about you had to be a certain age to play in a bar?
That era, that late 60s, early 70s era was a real free spirit kind of time, and there was a lot of bands and a lot of places to play. This post-COVID era, everything seems to have changed. There's not as many nightclubs, there's not as many bands, and it becomes a downward spiral. When there's less places to play, there's less bands. When there's less bands, there's less places hiring bands. But it was the opposite in that 70s, early 70s. It was a spiral. It was going up. Everybody had a band or wanted a band. There were hardly enough bands to go around, and you could easily show up at the neighborhood nightclub and say, we're a band, and you'd get a job. Interestingly, talking about Ann Arbor, we played the nightclub we're talking about, Bimbo's on the Hill, right between Ann Arbor and Ypsi, a real nice little pizza bar, which made it
Became famous.
Yeah, it was a famous bar, and so families could go in there and have pizza and a beer, and so it would be nothing for a 17-year-old Benny to walk in with a band of a couple older guys, and we would play.
And they would never even ask.
They wouldn't even ask. They wouldn't ask. Although the end of that particular story, when you and I were talking, I'd be at school the next day, first hour of class, nodding out, and my school teacher, who also lived in Ann Arbor, interestingly, Plymouth suburb of Ann Arbor, said, "Hey, didn't I see you playing at Bimbo's on the Hill last night?" And I didn't know what to say. I was afraid. He says, "Look, from now on, skip my class. Just come in at the end, for the end of the test, and you can stay home an extra hour." And it was pretty cool.
That's nice. That's respect right there. Were you writing music back then, or were you doing covers, or what was your band all about?
I think we were obviously covers, and any in the bar band scene. And some people will argue whether that was a good thing or a bad thing. Bands like the Sunday Funnies, bands like the Rockets, even the Frost, who started playing those big nightclubs, post Grandy Ballroom kind of things. They went to these big 18-year-old drink, big nightclubs. Were kind of forced, instead of playing one set of a concert, maybe all originals, you were forced to do 4 sets of a lot of covers, dance floor kind of music. So Sunday Funnies learned a lot of popular dance songs instead of playing Bob Seger all originals. So there's an argument whether that was good or bad for bands. We, playing the pizza and beer bar in Ann Arbor, played all the popular songs, although interestingly, we used to joke that we played Tutti Frutti, and someone yelled, "Tutti Frutti or get off the stage." They wanted that song. So we just had a natural affiliation for oldies. It just fell right into our wheelhouse for whatever reason.
Okay. I was curious. Now, as you went on later into the 80s and stuff, did you put out any records doing original stuff, or was it always covers?
In the oldies circuit, you obviously played covers, and but as we grew and mature, we did spice in some original songs as well. So on each of those albums, we have an original, at least an original song. Although there are covers as well. You go to the very first album that was recorded in the 1970s. The first song on the record was called "Rock with the Music," which Cub Coda wrote, and Henry Weck had a very popular part, real powerful drum, boom, boom, choppa, boom, boom, choppa, boom, boom, choppa. And we would try to recreate that. And so many people would think that was our original, because it wasn't Tutti Frutti that everybody knew wasn't your original. It felt like an original. We did an original version of the song. And to a lot of people who had never heard the song, it felt original to them. So there was twists on that. Like
Nice. Okay.
Now, when you started playing, you weren't called Benny and the Jets at that point. What was the name of your band?
Well, in the Bimbos on the Hill in high school, in 11th grade in high school, we went through a lot of different names. Whatever was configuration of guys there was. The actual band at Bimbos on the Hill was called the Apple Corps, which, interestingly, Chris Campbell from Bob Seger's band was in the Apple Corps right before he joined Bob Seger's band.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so he's an alumni.
So when did you start playing as Benny and the Jets? Was it after Elton John had the hit, or?
Almost simultaneously, but I like saying before. When that famous agent, Jerry Patlow, sent me down to see Question Mark, he said, I need an oldies band. And at that time, our band did oldies, but we weren't 100% oldies band. He had a band called Moose and Da Sharks, which was one of his big bands, and they were he couldn't keep up with all the work he had. So he says, I want the Sharks and the Jets. West Side Story, the Sharks, the Jets. Mm-hmm. And he says, you're going to be Benny and the Jets. They're Moose and the Sharks. So that's what it was, kind of about Moose and Benny, Moose and Benny, Sharks and Jets, Sharks and Jets. At the same time, or roughly the same time, all of a sudden this song, Bennie and the Jets comes out. And I thought we'd have to lose the name, but we didn't. And we already had the .com, BennyandtheJets.com, Benny and the Jets.com. Mm-hmm. And it just kind of became part of the lure.
Yeah, wow. And you told me a great story about Rick Nelson and how he had heard of Benny and the Jets, of all things. Maybe you could kind of tell us how that happened. How would Rick Nelson have heard of Benny and the Jets?
That's the same thing I asked him.
Yeah. All right.
We were playing at a really great concert club in Detroit called the Center Stage. And the Center Stage was one of those, it was not as big as the Michigan Palace, 5,000 seat. It was a few thousand seats. And so it got a very niche audience. I remember seeing Cheap Trick there. I remember seeing George Thorogood, the Destroyers there. And we had the opportunity to be the opening act for Ricky Nelson at the Center Stage. And I thought, boy, what a great thing is that I'm that little kid that was watching the Ozzie and Harriet show and waiting for Ricky to come on the end of the stage. So we're backstage playing the Center Stage nightclub, and the agent comes through and says, Ricky's getting ready to enter the building. I don't want anybody to say anything to him. Don't look him in the eye. Don't ask for an autograph. Don't, make yourself scarce. And us not wanting to get in trouble, we were just happy to have a gig. Yeah, whatever you say, we'll stand in the corner, whatever you want. And here comes Ricky Nelson walking into the building. And there's maybe 30 people backstage, but nobody's looking him in the eye or talking to him. He walks right in the room and says, "Where's Benny?" And I'm thinking, I'm going to get in trouble already, which was not, was easy for me to do, I guess. And so, I said, "I'm Benny." And he goes, "I always wanted to meet Benny and the Jets." And it felt like some kind of a gag or something. How's Ricky Nelson walking into a room and saying he always wanted to meet Benny and the Jets? Wouldn't it be the other way? Me saying I was watching you on TV, and I said, like you said, how is it that you always wanted to meet me? And he goes, my dad, Ozzy, and even that sounded odd to hear someone say, my dad, Ozzy Nelson. My dad, Ozzy Nelson, was the president of the Musicians Union. And the Musicians Union had a union newspaper. And in order for us to help protect that name, Benny and the Jets, we took an ad out in every issue of the union paper. And so he'd come downstairs of Ozzy and Nelson's house, just like the TV show, and on the kitchen table would be the union paper. And he would maybe thumb through it, or maybe it was open, and he'd see that little Benny and the Jet ad would catch his eye. So all the things going through Ricky Nelson's head, all the songs, all the garden parties, all the concerts, and he goes, who's this Benny and the Jets? And finally, he got to meet Benny and the Jets because we were the opening act.
Yeah.
And so we became great friends. After the show, Ricky Nelson goes out to the bus, and they're leaving, and I see Ricky Nelson left his guitar at the bar. And I go, holy cow. And this is that famous Elvis-esque guitar that had that leather binding guitar.
Right, with his name on it.
Yeah, with his name etched into the leather.
Yeah.
So I grab the guitar, I go running as fast as I can out to catch the bus, because he could be on to the next town and he'd never see his guitar. I go, Ricky, you forgot your guitar. He goes, Ben, he says, you're the only person in the world that would return that. Anybody else would have ran the other way. I got Ricky Nelson's guitar. and sadly, I didn't even think of doing that. Hadn't entered my mind. I just wanted to get it back to him. He goes, Benny, you live around here. We don't have any place to stay tonight. Where can we go? And I said, I live down the street in Plymouth. My friend works at the Mayflower Hotel. So we called the Mayflower and said, hey, Ricky Nelson needs a place to stay. Do you have any rooms? He goes, we got the bridal suite. I go, perfect. So Ricky Nelson and his entire band went to the little town of Plymouth, stayed at the Mayflower Hotel. They had the next day off, so they walked around the Kellogg's Park, and they loved the little quaint little town of Plymouth and hung out right there on Main Street.
It's a great story.
Ricky Nelson was really nice to us, really good to us.
Yeah, everything. I've taught a couple classes about him through the Ollie program at both at SVSU and also at Rutgers. And, that's what I got out of it. He seemed like a very down-to-earth, humble guy, considering how famous he was.
Yeah, a lot of people, when a rock star walks in the room, everybody wants to look at him, shake his hand, touch him. And that kind of, you'd be afraid that would put him in his own bubble and he wouldn't respond well. But once you were, I guess, in that bubble, he was your best friend.
Yeah, well, that's outstanding. I know, thinking back to a couple times I was on the Dr. Doo-Wop show, oftentimes Chubby Checker would come up. And I know you were a big advocate of Chubby Checker being in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So you've got to be kind of happy that it finally happened for him, that he'll be inducted this year. But you go back, you opened for Chubby Checker. Wasn't that maybe one of your first big gigs as
our original
as a
connection?
band?
Going back to Cub Coda, I was doing a radio show like Cub Coda did his radio show too. I followed in all those Cub Coda steps. We had a little radio show called the Dr. Doo-Wop Radio Show. In fact, there's a Facebook page, Memories of the Dr. Doo-Wop Show, and we try to interject some of the old shows and the old stories. And the story goes with Chubby Checker. Our first Benny and the Jets band first concert was at the our famous agent Jerry Pallow said, we're going to send you on the road. And we went to the fabulous Stork Club in Canada, where the home of the Royal Canadian Mounties Mounted Orchestra, where when you're a little kid, the ball would drop in Canada, and the big band would play at the famous Stork Club. It was kind of like a Lawrence Welk, but through the years, the big ballroom / Stork Club started doing rock and roll shows. They had Chubby Checker there, and they needed an opening act. So they let Benny and the Jets be the opening act for Chubby Checker, and we ended up, we were back then. We were a 3-piece band: guitar, bass, and drums. Very simple. Played Tutti Frutti. We played Johnny Be Good. We played the hits. We got them dancing. We had fun and got out of the way. In and out, easy setup, easy teardown. So we became a very likable opening act. They had a nice name, Benny and the Jets name. Chubby Checker with special guest Benny and the Jets. We could draw people. And we were very easy in and out, so we didn't get in the way of the headline act. And so we kind of buddied up with Chubby and became a regular opener for him. Opened for many tours, traveled around the country a lot with Chubby as his opening act. And so that was very important for a young band like Benny and the Jets at the time to be able to open. And then years later, when the Cleveland Rock and Roll Hall of Fame did not induct Chubby with those original Mount Morris of stars, Elvis Presley, Chubby Checker, Bo Diddley, those kind of big stars that you would think would be automatic, Chubby would be almost automatically entered. Then he kind of went to a back burner, and another generation got farther and farther away. People got less and less thinking of Chubby. So I don't know if I made it a personal mission, but I waved the flag a lot that, hey, you guys are forgetting about Chubby Checker. And luckily he did eventually get in.
Yeah, I mean, the twist alone.
Right.
You know,
Was Hank Ballard in the...
Well, yeah, Hank Ballard was, and again, I confess that back in the day, I was a big Hank Ballard fan, and I always thought, well, and he did. He basically copied Hank Ballard's version of the twist note for note, but that takes nothing away from the fact that it was the biggest dance hit of all time, definitely. Chubby Checker's version, and then it came back and was number one again.
And Limbo.
Yeah. Well, he had some other,
Yeah.
Let's Twist Again,
Yeah.
like we did last summer. But I mean, to have a song that was number one, and then like 18 months later, it becomes number one again. I mean, that was unheard of.
Right. That puts
but
it
that did happen. It's the only time
puts that in
a
the
song
iconic
ever
right.
became
Puts
a
that in
number
the
one hit
iconic
twice.
category, which should automatically put you into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
You would think, but he had a
Right.
real hard time because people thought he was a novelty, because he didn't write the song, because it wasn't the original song. But like you said, he put his stamp on it so strong that people around the world knew what the twist was, and really at that moment in time kind of changed. When you went to an Elvis Presley concert, you watched Elvis Presley. When you went to the Beatles concert, you screamed and cried and saw the Beatles. But Chubby got the world to dance.
Yeah.
He got the world to look at each other and do the twist. So he put his own little bump in the rock and roll highway.
Yeah, that there has never been a dance as popular as the twist. That's for sure. And the genius was it was so easy to do.
Yeah.
Not like the achy breaky or something, and some dances that are out there today.
That'll wrap up part one here with Benny Speer of Benny and the Jets. Benny's one of our legends that gets to have not only playing abilities to discuss all his career and jams and music, but also a father that helped bring music to the city of Detroit, which was just immense in how everything unfolded. Come back here in 2 weeks for part two with Benny. We're going to dig more into his history, where he went, and what happened after that. And until then, we want to thank you all.
On behalf of our hosts, we would like to thank the Michigan Rock Legends Hall of Fame, our guests, and especially our listeners. The MMHP is found on the 989 network, as well as all familiar podcast hubs. Up-to-the-minute information, as well as Dr. J and Sir Fred's Michigan Music Songs of the Week, can be found on the MMHP's Facebook page, /MMHP989. You can connect with Scott at scottbakermusic.com, Dr. J at michiganrockandrolllegends.com, Sir Fred at fredrife.com, and Mr. Mike on YouTube as MRBTEE1.
And on behalf of Dr. J, Sir Fred, Mr. Mike, and myself, Scott Baker, we would like to thank Eddie Switek for being